The Great Railroad Strike of 1877, narrated by Aubrey Shinholster. What was the Great Railroad Strike of 1877? It was a short strike in duration, but had a large loss of life and destruction of property. It's considered the first national strike in American history, and is often seen as a class conflict between workers and a capitalist oligarchy. But what caused the Great Railroad Strike of 1877? In 1877, the U.S. was in a depression that resulted in large numbers of wage cuts. These wage cuts followed previous wage cuts that likely followed the Great Financial Panic of 1873. Most workers were affected by the wage cut, including our highest officials. Food prices rose as crops were ruined in the extremely hot summer of 1876. Standard of living declined for workers and farmers, and popular anger at banks, railroads, and corporations increased. National trade unions disintegrated during the Depression. The disintegration of trade unions was due to an abundance of immigrant labor and an economy that was becoming increasingly monopolistic. Here's some words from a railroad man that was captured in the Pittsburgh Daily Post, July 20th, 1877. You see, since the 10% reduction, we were getting $1.65 per trip. Then we ran to Derby, and from there we returned in time to take most of our meals at home. Now, however, the trip extends to Altoona a day or two, and we have to pay boarding at a rate of 25 cents per meal. The reduction in pay and reductions in time taken together will leave us nothing over $8 or $10 a week at the best. And after paying our boarding, we will scarcely have enough to keep our families from starving. And then while we and our families are suffering, the officials are raking in their fat salaries for little work and are enjoying themselves in plenty. I don't believe in the principle of strikes, but this is more than I can stand, and I'm fighting for it to the bitter end. So how did the workers respond to these wage cuts? Strike, 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 strike. About the strike. The strike began in Martinsburg, West Virginia on July 20th, 1877, and spread to locations in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Maryland the next day. The leaders of the railroad brotherhoods disavowed the strike and urged workers to return to work. On July 22nd, 1877, the Executive Committee of the Workmen's Party urged all sections of the party to aid the railroad strikers. Demonstrations took place in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Reading, and other cities. These demonstrations were attended by 4,000 to 6,000 people and were filled with protesting and fiery speeches. The strike culminated in riot, arson, and murder, which turned the city of Pittsburgh into pandemonium. Strikers were rendered powerless as long as other people could take their places on the job, so they were forced to use sometimes violent coercive techniques to keep people from replacing them. Most of the damage to the railroad was inflicted by people who represented general portions of the economy and not the railroad workers themselves. Some politicians were sentimental to the strikers, while others were sentimental to big business. Strikers disabled the state and national government on occasion during the strike. The end of the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The Great Railroad Strike ended around August 1st, 1877, about 45 days after it began. The spontaneity and the fast formation of the strike left little time for planning or organizing. The workers were unable to sustain unity and momentum as the strike grew uncontrolled. After initial defeats, law and order were able to regroup swiftly. So to sum it up, the strikers were forced to break when they ran out of money, lost organization, and when federal troops became available. The results of the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. The negative results. This Great Railroad Strike is historically seen as a failure. Hundreds of workers were fired, and all workers lost pay of at least 1 to 2 weeks. Only a few thousand of the workers had their pay cuts rescinded, which was the reason for the strike in the first place. There were over 100 deaths related to the Great Railroad Strike. Hundreds of people were injured, thousands of people were jailed, and over $5 million in property was damaged or destroyed. However, there were positive results. The main result is that the strikers gained sympathy for an 8-hour day and the need for improved health and safety on the job. And the workers demonstrated that united action can be effective. Since this was the first national strike, we have all seen other examples of the effects of striking and the use of lessons learned from the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. Thank you very much for watching. The end.